In July of 1993, Angela Johnson's boyfriend, Dustin Honken, with Johnson's help, abducted and took the life of Greg Nicholson, Lori Duncan, and Duncan's two young daughters, Amber and Candy. Nicholson, who had sold drugs for Honken, was the central witness in a drug case against Honken. The Duncans had the misfortune of being present when Honken and Johnson arrived at their home to deal with Nicholson. Months later, Honken again, with Johnson's assistance, took the life of a second potential witness against Honken, Johnson's former boyfriend, Terry DeGeus. It all started in 1992. Honken started manufacturing methamphetamine with his friend Tim Cutcomp in Arizona. Honken's brother, Jeff Honken, financed the operation. Honken distributed the methamphetamine to Greg Nicholson and Terry DeGeus, who were both drug dealers in Mason City, Iowa. In early 1993, during one of Honken's trips to Mason City, DeGeus sent Johnson, who was his girlfriend at the time, to deliver either drug proceeds or methamphetamine to Honken. Johnson told Honken that because DeGeus was using too much of the methamphetamine for his own personal use, Honken should deal directly with Johnson instead. Johnson and Honken began a romantic relationship, and within 6 months, Johnson became pregnant with Honken's child. In late February or early March of 1993, Cutcomp moved to Iowa but continued participating in Honken's drug enterprise. In March 1993, police began investigating Nicholson and executed a search warrant for his residence, which led to the discovery of a large amount of methamphetamine and money. Nicholson agreed to cooperate with law enforcement and told agents that Honken had supplied him with several pounds of methamphetamine over a period of 10 to 11 months, for which he paid Honken a total of approximately $100,000. On March the 21st, 1993, Nicholson met with Honken to deliver drug proceeds. During their conversation, which was monitored by police, they discussed past and future deliveries of methamphetamine. That day, police arrested Honken and Cutcomp. In Honken's pocket, officers found a note listing money owed to Honken by two individuals referred to as G-Man and T-Man. A receipt for the purchase of chemicals was found in Cutcomp's pocket. After Honken was arrested, Jeff Honken disposed of items from Honken's drug lab that Honken had kept in one of Jeff Honken's storage sheds. In April 1993, a federal grand jury indicted Honken for conspiracy to distribute methamphetamine. Honken was released on bond. Honken informed the court that he intended to plead guilty, and a plea hearing was scheduled for July 30th, 1993. During June and July of 1993, Honken and Johnson began searching for Nicholson. On the evenings they looked for Nicholson, Johnson would ask her friend, Christy Gobatz, to babysit Johnson's daughter. Honken and Johnson borrowed Gobatz's car on these occasions so that they would not be spotted by Nicholson. On July 7th, 1993, Johnson purchased a semi-automatic 9mm assault pistol at a pawn shop about an hour's drive from her home. The last time Johnson asked Gobatz to babysit so that she and Honken could look for Nicholson was July 24th, 1993. That evening, Nicholson, Nicholson's girlfriend, Lori Duncan, and Lori Duncan's two children, Candy and Amber, were murdered. Johnson later recounted the details of the murders to various witnesses. Angela Johnson knocked on the door of the Duncans' home and asked if she could look at their telephone book. Johnson was carrying a cosmetics demonstration bag and claimed that she had an appointment to give a demonstration but was uncertain of the address. She secured entry into the house, with Honken apparently right behind her. There was testimony that once the door was open, Honken and Johnson rushed the occupants. While Johnson and Honken were in the house, one or both of them videotaped Nicholson, making statements stating Honken is innocent. At some point, Johnson went upstairs with Candy and Amber and had them pack up some of their things, either to persuade the girls that they were going on a trip or to convince any subsequent visitors to the house that they had done so. Honken and Johnson bound and gagged the adults with materials that either Honken or Johnson had brought to the house and drove the victims to a wooded area. Honken took the two adults out of the car and shot them while Johnson waited in the car with the children. The children were then taken out of the car and shot as well. All four were placed in a single grave that had been dug earlier. Their bodies were eventually discovered years later. After the murders, Honken provided his attorney with the videotape in which Nicholson exculpated Honken. When Honken appeared for his plea hearing, which took place 5 days after the murders, he declined to plead guilty. His attorney told the prosecutor that the case was not as strong as the government had believed. The tape was eventually returned to Honken and never seen again. With Nicholson missing, the government's attention turned to DeGeus. On October the 27th, 1993, several individuals were subpoenaed, including Johnson and DeGeus' friend Aaron Ryerson. Ryerson was questioned about possible connections between Honken and DeGeus. After Ryerson spoke with DeGeus, DeGeus called Johnson and told her what Ryerson had said to him about his time before the grand jury. 9 days later, on November the 5th, DeGeus dropped his daughter off at his parents' house and told them that he was going to meet with Johnson. By this time, DeGeus suspected that something may have happened to Nicholson, and he was concerned that he might share Nicholson's fate. Although DeGeus knew that Johnson was involved with Honken, he apparently agreed to meet with her because he still had strong feelings for her. DeGeus was murdered that night. The evidence indicates that DeGeus was either shot by Honken and then struck with a baseball bat, or a fist and then shot. Following DeGeus' disappearance, Johnson gave conflicting reports to police and others about the night he disappeared, telling some individuals that she had not seen him that night and telling others that she had seen him, but that he had left after they had spoken. During the fall of 1993, Gaubats found a bag containing a large black handgun which had a silencer attached to it in her closet. Upset by this discovery, she called Johnson, who retrieved the weapon. In March 1995, the federal drug charges against Honken were dismissed. In 1995, Honken enlisted the assistance of Dan Cobain to help with the methamphetamine operation, but before Cobain was allowed to participate, Honken took him to see Johnson for her approval. Unbeknownst to Honken or Johnson, however, Cobain was cooperating with law enforcement and provided the authorities with information about the methamphetamine operation. On February 7, 1996, before Honken and his associates were able to produce methamphetamine, law enforcement agents executed a search warrant for Honken's home, whereupon they seized items related to the production of methamphetamine. 2 months later, the government brought drug charges against Honken and Cutcomb. After Honken's arrest, Honken and Johnson discussed killing witnesses, including Cobain and law enforcement agents. Cutcomb testified that Honken was reluctant to involve Johnson in any efforts to kill Cobain because she was a hothead and just wanted to go and do it. Cutcomb was also worried about Johnson pushing Honken to follow through with the plans. Honken pled guilty to drug charges in 1997. Around the time of the sentencing hearing, Johnson called Jeff Honken and yelled, if Dustin wasn't going able to see his children, that she was going to make sure Jeff doesn't either. Johnson was charged with the murders in July 2000 and taken to the Benton County, Iowa jail, where she met another inmate, Robert McNeese. McNeese convinced Johnson that she was connected to the mob and that he could find an inmate already serving a life sentence who would confess to the murders. He told her that all he needed was information about the crime so that this inmate could convince the authorities of his involvement. Johnson obliged, providing maps depicting the location of the victims' bodies and information about how they were killed. McNeese then provided this information to the authorities. Using the maps, officers found Nicholson and the Duncan family in a single grave. The two adults were found bound and gagged and had been shot multiple times, suffering gunshots to the head. DeGeus' body was found a few miles away in a field behind an abandoned house. He had suffered multiple gunshot wounds and his skull had been fractured into dozens of pieces. Now, Angela Johnson's trial was trifurcated into 3 phases. There was a merits phase, in which the jury found her guilty of the murders, an eligibility phase in which the jury determined that she was eligible for the death penalty, and a selection phase in which the jury voted for the death penalty for Johnson's participation in the deaths of Laurie, Amber, Candy Duncan, and Terry DeGeus. The jury voted that Johnson will face the death penalty in participation in Greg Nicholson's murder. In a separate trial, Honken was also convicted. He was sentenced to death, and he was executed. Johnson's death penalty was commuted to life in prison.